Afternoon. This session is about aiming for the top, how you can shape your PD career for DCM and principal officer roles and beyond. Many thanks to the Public Diplomacy Council for their sponsorship of the Lunch and Learn series. The PDC holds events like this Lunch and Learn because it is dedicated to fostering public recognition of public diplomacy in the conduct of foreign affairs. Since its founding in 1988, the Council, originally named the Public Diplomacy Foundation, has evolved to serve also as a resource and advocate for the teaching, training, and development of public diplomacy as an academic discipline. So today, I'm pleased to introduce Dan Shribney, who some of you may already know, who is representing PDC and here to tell us about their upcoming events and how you can get involved with the Council. Additionally, as a side note, Dan will be in charge of training new PAOs at FSI this summer.
Good afternoon. Are we working? Yes. Good afternoon. Yes, we are. And this is just like a real PD event overseas, right? Where you're seeing, okay, how many of my contacts will stay for the event if the food doesn't show up? And I'm very grateful and pleased that so many of you are, and we're working on the food. But as she mentioned, the Public Diplomacy Council is a nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to the advocacy and the strengthening and academic study of public diplomacy. Our members include former public diplomacy officers, former people from international broadcasting, leading academics, leading professionals in related walks of life, and some of officers like you, because we have an associate membership for current officers at a discount price. And if you go to Public Diplomacy Council, all one word, .org, you can find information about that. Our activities, we feel this is one of the most important activities we do in terms of providing a venue and opportunity, and I see food, for mid-career officers to address and discuss issues of real importance to yourselves and your careers. And we appreciate all the work that you've done on this and look forward to continuing this one more event in this coming year and then in the new fiscal year. And we also have a variety of other meetings and activities, particularly the first Monday of every month. We have a program again at 12 o'clock in this space. We've had the Acting Undersecretary of Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, Bruce Wharton, come, the CEO of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, John Lansing, representatives from Canadian public diplomacy, and in May, our speaker will be the head of National Geographic to talk about their work and engaging around the world and how we can and do work together. So we invite you to do this, to look at our site, to let us know what topics you would like us to address. If you want to join, that would be wonderful. And just on a side note, since I will be running the PAO courses this summer, for those of you who will be PAOs, look forward to working with you. For those of you who will not be PAOs this time around, but have views on what PAOs need to be told or trained in so they do an even better job of being wonderful, I welcome your thoughts and comments, which I promise to keep anonymous. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it back.
Thank you, Dan. In addition, I would also like to thank Alma Burke and Alan Saunders, who are currently in the back right now putting the food together. Alma is the PDC fellow, and Alan is here on behalf of AFSA, and part of the reason why we have the space that we're in today, and plus all of these wonderful tech resources. Also, as a reminder for those of you who haven't already signed up, please do fill in the sign-in sheet. It's how we track whether or not our topics are of use to you and whether or not, and therefore we can continue to better serve you in the future. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the panel members to you. Going by alphabetical order, we're going to start with Nancy Corbett. She started as a PD officer with USIA in 1999. She served in EAP, NEA, and SCA overseas, and most recently was the principal officer in Hamburg. She is currently brushing up her Arabic at FSI because she will be PO Alexandria next. Next to her is the famous Elizabeth Trudeau, who just finished serving as a director for States Press Operations here and she will go on to serve as the Consul General Lahore beginning in September 2017. She has served overseas at the U.S. mission to NATO and in various AF posts. Next to her is Scott Weinhold. He was the CG in Shenyang from 2013 to 2016 and will be the PAO in Ankara. He has served in many EAP posts, and to prove that, he speaks Mandarin, Vietnamese, Mongolian, and basic Japanese. And finally, last but definitely not least, we have Benjamin Ziff, who joined the Foreign Service in 1988 and has served in WHA, NEA, EAP, and EUR. Previously, he was the DCM in Bogota and is currently a EU DAS in 2 offices in the Nordic and Baltic countries and for PD. He is fluent in Spanish, Hebrew, and Italian. Now, before we get started, one last thing. I want to make sure everyone understands that the panelists are sharing their own thoughts and opinions and views on career advancement. Therefore, taking their advice does not necessarily guarantee that you'll have as wonderful a career as they have. Exactly. Also, this session is being videotaped for everyone's awareness. And if, with the panelists' permission, will be made available online later. And one last thing, for Q&A, after the panelists give their opening remarks, if you have a question, please do stand up and file behind the microphone that is in the middle of the aisle. And we found that this is just the quickest way to get through the Q&A, because sometimes we end up having a lot of questions. So thank you. I'm going to let them take it away. If you wanna.
Depending on the press professional here to make sure the mic is working. Thanks, Liz. I want to first huge thanks to Evelyn and Dan for hosting and organizing this event. I've done lots of things like this overseas in foreign languages, but never with a group of my colleagues or in English like this. So this is a great big deal. It's a change for me. So thank you very much for putting up with me. I was going to tell you a bunch of, can you all hear me? I was going to tell you a bunch of really fabricated stories, but then Chris Estradi and Jeff Ellis, who worked with me in the Cultural Affairs shop in Kabul, Afghanistan, showed up back there. So now I have to sort of keep it like more honest. Okay. First of all, in spite of my tendencies to run on, I wanted to be really quick and say that I ran into a friend who's a senior econ officer in the halls of FSI. He's studying Russian. At any rate, he just served on the promotion panel, and he told me he was distraught to see the numbers of PD officers who couldn't be promoted. He wouldn't advance them for promotion because they only served just in the press sector or just in the cultural sector. So I know you guys have already heard this a million times, but in case you haven't, I wanted to reiterate that appears to be pretty important and in terms of getting promoted. And I personally, my little niche in cubbyhole is cultural affairs work, but I was BPAO in Chengdu and I was AIO in Beijing. So I had some serious discomfort in those jobs, but I did it. So I urge you to do both types of jobs as well. I had some other things I wanted to talk about, EERs, about 360s, about the letter you have to write, the one-pager to apply for DCM or principal officer, and some of the key things there. I can do that later if you're interested. But I wanted to just end the note on my little remarks on mentoring. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know much about the department's formal mentoring program, but I've spent pretty much all my career overseas, and everywhere I go, I actively look for mentors. I was lucky that at my last post, my DCM, a career management cone officer, was a great mentor, and another great mentor I had in Germany was the deputy management counselor. Just think big when you think who might be able to mentor me, who might be able to take a look at my EER to make sure I'm not going off the reservation and hurting myself with this EER. And management officers often know an awful lot about how the department works, things some of the rest of us wouldn't even dream. So with that, I think I'm going to pass this microphone to Liz.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks to all of you. It's so good to see so many of you. Frankie knows because we work together in press ops. I'm over at FSI now. I'll go to Lahore in actually August now, which is great. I'm looking forward to it. I'll be very general. A few things on this, and I think a lot of you know it, is connections matter. Your reputation matters. Do good work, period. That's all that matters. I would disagree with Nancy in some. I'm terrible at cultural affairs. I'll say that. Terrible. Just like I would be the worst CAO in the world. For our colleagues who do cultural affairs, you have my utmost respect. Never hire me to do any of that work. But wherever you are, and I've had some weird jobs. I was a human resource officer. Actually, my first post taught me more than I ever wanted to know about management of locally engaged staff. Jobs come to you. Regardless of what the job is or what the title is, it's just fundamental that you do absolutely everything you can to do that job the best that you can. Full stop. I think we all know that, but I also sometimes think that when we get offered weird jobs, we think, that's not going to look great, or that doesn't follow into the department's very structured chart. Forget that. Jobs come to you, I think. I won't be all philosophical and say for a reason, but I will say that you can learn something from every single job you do. And that counts TDYs, that counts excursions, that counts visits. Just take every opportunity you can. Some of you may know I was paneled to go as DCM to Sierra Leone when the department asked me to come back and take the job as Director of Press Operations. Not a job I would have sought, but it's a job I learned a lot from. You'll never find out more about the I was going to use the word underbelly, but Nancy won't let me use the word underbelly because we're being recorded. The underbelly of the interagency process than in that job. So again, just concentrate on what you can bring to a job and what you can learn from it. Secondly, I would stress connections, and that goes all directions. I am not a big fan of formal mentorship. But I think that the connections that you build in the department will serve you through your entire career, both inside and outside the department. The locally engaged staff that you worked with 15 years ago probably knows your new ambassador. So the question is how did you treat them? Have you stayed in touch with them? As they're building their career, are you always available to help them? Don't be a jerk. Always help. It's a good fundamental rule. And the last one I would say, and this is something, frankly, I hear a lot from PD officers who say, I'm not ready to be a PO or a DCM. And the question is, why not? You manage a ton of people. You manage a ton of money. And don't tell me that being a DCM is worse than running herd on an exchange program, because I've been there and it's worse, okay? So if you're considering it, talk to us, because I think that this department and this government would benefit enormously from having more public affairs and public diplomacy professionals in senior ranks. We bring something to the job that's value added, and I think is unusual in the senior levels of this department. We tell the story of America, not always successfully and not always to America's benefit, but we do. So I'll end there. And I'll pass it over to Scott, who will be using Mongolian for his session.
That's right. Yeah, Seinbat's Ganu. Just seeing this room, I'll tell you an old PAO trick. We would always, this is a universal worldwide thing that nobody sits in the front row. So we would always set up the front row, and then 5 minutes before we'd come in and whip away the front chairs.
Nice.
I'll second what Liz just said about, I think PD officers, I'm clearly biased, but I think we are probably the best prepared of anybody to take these jobs, especially the principal officer jobs, but DCM as well. Like management and consular officers, we manage early, and we manage a lot of people, and we manage budgets. And like political and econ officers, we do programmatic things and we do thematic things. And we also work with the other agencies. We work with USAID, FCS, FAS, all the different agencies you get at Post. So I think all of that is some of the best preparation you can have for post management jobs. One thing I would say is be sure that you know what the job is and why you want it. I don't think anybody should want to be a DCM or principal officer because they want to be a DCM or principal officer. There are people who go into those jobs who become profoundly uncomfortable with what the job is. If you don't like public speaking, it's not really the job. And that's another reason why PD officers are probably good at it. I see some Paul and econ officers go into jobs and they've never in their whole career addressed a large group of foreigners. We do that a lot. But there's a lot of internal things. I was surprised by the last job I did was about 80% internal and a lot of very difficult personnel issues. I had to kick 3 people out of country. Those are hard conversations to have. So be aware of what the job is and be clear-eyed about this is what I'm getting into, and so you're not surprised. And then the only other thing I would say, and this is an excellent place to say it, is go for it early. I never realized that there were O2 level jobs in these areas. I didn't even think about it till I'd been in O1 for like 10 years. And that, again, goes to think about it early, look at what's out there, talk to other people and contacts, and see what's available. And why not you? You are prepared. I've seen some people who are massively unprepared, but it's probably not you. You're smart, you're generalist, you're doing well. You can succeed at these jobs. And I'll pass it on to Ben.
It's got not much left to say after 3 folks who gave you the real wisdom. I just want to talk very briefly. I made a little flow chart about, see, there you go. Because I think this all starts with the question, do you want to be a DCM and an ambassador? I have to say, I've been shocked at how often the answer from my PD colleagues is no, I don't. In fact, last year we had, I think it was 9 or 10 of the largest DCM jobs in Western Europe opening up. We had something like 90, 100 bidders on those jobs. 5 were PD officers, one of which was me. So that was 4 other PD officers on DCM Madrid, DCM Berlin, DCM Rome, DCM London. And yet you talk to our colleagues and they go, nah. I want to be in my own little world. I want to do the fun stuff. I don't want to have to do that kind of personnel crap and kicking people out of the country and doing all this budget BS. And no, just leave me alone. Let me do my thing. And so I think the first question you need to ask is, do you want to do it? Do not be, and I echo Scott, do not take a job like that if you don't want it. But there are a million reasons why you should. Not only are you prepared, but you are able to change the culture of the State Department to one where PD is much better integrated into the operation of this institution. So long as we are content to sort of do our own little walled garden thing and, play on that good stuff that we know is really relevant in the long term and suffer the rolled eyes and grimaces of our colleagues, we're not going to be able to actually move the needle on how this institution does public diplomacy and public affairs. So I would just urge you not just to think about whether you want to be a DCM or a chief of mission, but want to, because it's quite interesting, quite challenging, similar in a lot of ways to being a PAO in a big post, but you actually do wield a certain amount of influence across the interagency, not just in the State Department. So let's just assume that you said no. I don't want to be a DCM or a PO. I want to keep doing this, and my goal is to end my career as PAO Rome. That's my goal. Well, let me tell you, it's going to get a lot harder to do that without doing the things that you'd have to do anyway to be a chief of mission or DCM. I'm sure, I have it on good authority, that the days where you could make senior foreign service as a PD officer and not serve in Washington are done. They're done. You're not going to be able to do, I'm going to go from post to post to post doing those challenging things, and then I'm going to bounce over the threshold, and maybe I'll come back for one last tour in Washington and I'll retire to my farm in outside Washington. Those days are probably gone. You're going to have to come to Washington anyway and do the things that you do in Washington. So that's truth number one. So if you're going to come back to Washington and do the jobs that many of us are doing here, might as well do it on your way to doing something, to doing a larger institutional role as DCM or chief of mission. And there is a path. It's a pretty clear path if you think about it. How do most of us get those jobs? Agree, there's a certain amount of happenstance and circumstance, but the way to become a DCM or a chief of mission, if you want to do that, is number one, Washington tours and regional bureaus. Regional bureaus decide who are PAOs or POs and DCMs and chief of missions. So you want that job, you have to serve in a regional bureau, okay? And not just once. Do it early. Go out, come back in increasingly senior jobs. Do non-PD jobs. Do IROG jobs. Don't come back and only work in EURPD or AFPD. Come back and be a desk officer, be a deputy director, whatever it is, outside the PD cone. The panels will look at this and saying, wow, you've only done PD? Maybe not. Oh, you've done PD and this other stuff? How cool is that? You've been an HR officer? Excellent preparation. Then you seek the all-important office director or DAS jobs. Why? Office directors usually go out to be DCMs. DASs often go out, except in certain cases like mine, go off to be chiefs of mission. And it's very straightforward. If you look at any bureau, ambassadors usually come from the DAS corps, and DCMs come from the office director corps. It's that way across the bureau. So if you want to do any of these jobs, the path is relatively charted for you. Let me wrap up there, and we can take Q's and A's at the end, because there are I have lots of other things I'm sure all of us have to say about how to get where you want to be and what PD officers do well and do less well in charting their careers. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much, panelists. Now, since the food did get here late, why don't we take a 5-minute break so that everyone can get their lunch and bring it back to their chairs. And if everyone's okay with it, if the panelists can get to the head of the line first so they can come back and get back to the table, that would be great. So we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes. All right. Looks like most people got their food. If everyone could please take their seats, we can resume. Just to give people a couple of minutes to think of questions, and then please do line up at the back of the room where the microphone is, and also to give you guys a chance to eat a little bit. I'm going to throw some numbers at you. This is fresh from Ripper. Overall, PD promotion rates are slightly above other cones, 29% to the overall 26%. And this has been a consistent trend. It was about 25% to 24% in 2015, so we are ticking up a little bit. However, notable exceptions are at the CM, where there are 0 PD officers at the CM level, whereas at the MC level, it's 22% versus the average of 25%. And at the O3 level, we were promoted at a lower rate than the average. We were promoted at a rate of 34% to the overall 39%. So there is still a lot of work to be done. PD officers are inching their way up as a percentage of chiefs of mission, around 7%. But we are overall the least represented, but we are catching up to consular, so yay. As we all know and suspect, Pol and Econ make up nearly 2/3 of career ambassadors. At the DCM level, we are remaining stable at around 11%, and we're third after Pol and Econ, who together makes up 70% of all DCMs. Finally, at the DAS level, which Ben talked about, we are at around 15%, which is on par with our management cone colleagues. And together with management, we are third after Pol and Econ, who again makes up about 2/3 of all DAS positions. So I'm happy to share these numbers in the follow-up email when I'm also sharing the video link with the panelists' permission. But this is all to give us a lot to think about in the fact that we still have a long way to go as a cone in being represented in the upper ranks of State Department. All right, it looks like we have a question. So we're going to kick this off.
Yeah.
Why I got this question, but I am going to pass it to my panelists as soon as I can. One thing I would say, just based on Evelyn's points, let public affairs and public diplomacy officers have the confidence of a mid-level political officer. I mean, really, guys, like these stats are stunning to me. I'd like to see more. The PO and DCM process, I can only speak to my experience. And then I would turn it over maybe to Ben to talk about sort of the bureau and how that works. So I've bid twice on DCM and PO jobs. Obviously, I think you can look at FS bid if people are interested. They have a list of projected vacancies. In my case, both times I heard actually from bureaus who were interested in knowing if I was interested in bidding on jobs. You put in the job, you do the process, you follow the forms, you do the letter, and I think, Scott, you were going to talk about, Nancy, you were going to talk about some of the letter, your statement of interest. There are some people within our ranks who are very good at lobbying. I am terrible at it, so I'm not going to talk about that. What I will say is that in both cases, you have a series of interviews, just like when you're applying or bidding for a PAO or an AIO or an ACAO position. Same sort of thing, but you're talking more broadly about your experience. You're not talking about your experience in grants management. You're talking about your experience in helping shape teams, helping form a consensus, managing budgets, dealing with crises, dealing with difficult situations. You do recognize that the D committee is made out of representatives of functional bureaus. It's always useful to touch base with those people. Sometimes they will reach out to you if they have not heard from you, as in my case during the last one. And then the one thing I would note too, and again, this is from my experience, remember that the D committee makes decisions based not on your entire slate of bids, but they do it by post. So for example, hypothetically, if you made the short list on several jobs, if you get offered a position early in it, you better want all those jobs because you can't say no. Okay? So the first job you get offered is the first job you take. I'll say that I'm very excited to go to Lahore. I was offered a job a couple weeks later that I was very surprised to be offered, and I still can't talk about it because it makes me really sad. But so I'll pass it to Nancy. We'll have to talk about this video getting published.
I'm one of those folks who's here today who has not had a Washington tour. Sorry, Ben. Oh, and there's Scott. Okay, anyway, Mitch, apparently you can't do that anymore. Well, anyway. Okay, I just wanted to say that when I bid from Kabul, I bid on Principal Officer Hamburg with no Western European experience. I knew for a fact I was not getting that job because I had no Western European experience. I didn't speak German. They were going to have to train me on and on and on. But you know what? I mean, I got the job. And I think the whole, I can't speak to the intricacies of how the D committee works and how everything else works. I'm going to again look towards Ben for that because I'm pretty sure he knows. But you have to get 360s. And back in 2010, I had to have 360s from subordinates, really important. People who report to you, maybe more important tthan anything else. I had to have 360s from peers, from superiors, from other agency people with whom I worked as part of a team in Afghanistan. And at that point, we also had to have contacts from outside the government entirely, like the Aga Khan Trust for Culture did a recommendation for me. So it's really important. I think probably thinking about your subordinates and always taking the people who are part of your team. I hate the word subordinate, but the people who report to you, always take great care of these people because it's the right thing to do. But if you can only work in self-interest, then trust me, you're not going to get some of these jobs in the current environment if you don't get good reports from the people, who work with you, who report up to you. So that's my strongest. So if there's money for travel, training, awards, think who on my staff needs this stuff. Just don't keep it all to yourself. We all know people like that, and we really don't want to work with them anymore if we don't have to. Okay. Ben? Scott?
I'll say one quick thing before the expert weighs in, but there is also, there's just an advantage to bidding on things to get your name in there. I mean, you want to be willing to go, but when I was bidding for my last job, I had put in bids on a couple of principal officer jobs in EAP that were pretty nice. And then I got a nice call from my friend who was the DAS for China. And he said, those nice jobs, you're not going to get them. But I have a job. I have a cold, smoggy edge of Siberia next to North Korea job that you'd be great for. So, and it was a good experience. But the fact that my name was in there for the Bureau, when they started looking around, it was there with the letter and with everything was laid out there. So you just by having your name out there, that's I think a good thing as well.
Well, I think Scott's absolutely right. You can't win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. So if you're at all interested, throw your name in there. It may not come out the way you think because the D committee does not have to respect anything or any bureau's wishes or your wishes. The D committee can be, it's basically, you may want to, Scott may say, I'm really want to go to Vientiane, and everyone said, it's perfect, it'll be great for you, it's wonderful. And on the other end, the D committee says, you know what, I think, Shenyang is good for you. Yeah, you're the right guy for that. And as he said, you don't say, no, let me wait for something better. This is not the place to do that. So sometimes happenstance occurs. The D committee is increasingly activist in terms of trying to find the right person that they believe for the right post. So be prepared that sometimes either someone else may get the nod for a post you were going for, or a post you never even thought of that you didn't bid on might come in, and basically they'll say, wouldn't you like to bid on, the Congo? It'd be great for you. So that's when you need to make a decision. So that's kind of the black box of the D committee, but the preparation is kind of straightforward. You write a statement of interest, but it's kind of, I think it's one of those things like making sure that the red M&Ms are not in the rock band's dressing rooms. It's like, you have subject-verb agreement? Are you illiterate or somewhat literate? But the most important thing that Scott said was, my friend who was the DAS. People like to hire people they know. We all know this, right? Very, very rarely does the State Department hire pigs in a poke. They hire someone who at least knows someone who knows someone. So when you're lobbying, and you should lobby, because people want to know, your excellence does not necessarily shine through to everyone. It only shines through the people who know you. So you figure out the list of people who know the person who makes the decision. Who do you know who knows somebody? And then you reach out and you say, Scott, I understand you have a great friend who's a DAS in EAP. Could you put in a good word? And you go along the line of people who knows this person, and that's the way, like any other job, that's the way it works.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to repeat the question that led to these answers for the benefit of the video, because people who are watching this video but are not in this room, if it's not spoken into the microphones around the room, it won't be picked up at all. So the question that was asked that led to the 4 answers was essentially, what qualifications do an officer need in order to be competitive for a DCM or principal officer role?
Okay, hi, my name is Virginia Elliott, and I'm the press unit chief for the Bureau of Consular Affairs. My question is if you could differentiate maybe a little more between the skill sets needed to be a DCM versus a principal officer.
we're going to divide this question. You want to do the show?
I just wanted to say I've been a principal officer, and I can tell you the buck really ends up stopping with the DCM. So as a principal officer, you really want to do everything you can to help out your DCM. And that's all I wanted to say. I think the DCM job is actually a way bigger job than the principal officer job, with the possible exception of Principal Officer Frankfurt, which is like one of our biggest posts in the entire world.
Yeah, I mean, they're very different jobs. When we took the DCM principal officer course, the first day, I think the first hour, they said DCM is one of the worst jobs in the Foreign Service and principal officer is the best. And there's some reasons for that. I mean, principal officer, you don't get into the big national disputes. You run your own little world. There's a lot of good things about it. But I would say DCM is probably the most important job to the success of a mission overall, more than the ambassador. In terms of morale, in terms of whether things actually get done, just super, super important to have really good people. Probably all of you know this already, but very key. In terms of the actual differences, I mean, we've all worked in embassies and seen what the DCM does. The principal officer just runs the whole post. As I said, what surprised me is how much of my job was internal. I thought it would kind of be external 80%, internal 20%. But I was running a post of 50 Americans and 150 local staff with no DCM-ish type person, no deputy principal officer. So you're doing all that internal stuff, which I found I actually enjoyed. But you're going from the sublime to the third floor toilets aren't working. What are we going to do? And you're literally walking around with the maintenance person saying, well, if we plunge this one, does this work? Talk about substantive work. That's substantive work.
No shit.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know if anybody has a better, but I don't know, the DCM job, you have any thoughts on?
I mean, I think that there are similar jobs. If you're a PO, you're a mini chief of mission. So you are essentially the figurehead, the godhead of your mission. And when you're in the DCM, you're kind of caught between the whiny subordinates and the whiny superior or whatever. So, and I would agree that it can be the worst job, but in a way they're complementary, because the DCM is kind of worried about the central government and keeping the ambassador happy and making sure that the various interagency folks work, whereas you rely on the principal officer out there to make sure that his or her patch is working as well as it can, that you're getting the reporting in. So in a way, it's kind of like a franchise operation where you have the mini U.S. embassy out in Guadalajara or wherever it might be that is doing its own thing, and it's crucially important that you have confidence and faith in the PO, because that way you don't have to worry about it. And basically the PO will only come back to you and saying, emergency, send new plungers, or whatever the hell it is that you need to do.
Yeah, if you have a good DCM, if you're a principal officer, you have a good DCM. I had a great one in China, a couple of great ones, but they basically said, I have way too much on my plate. Don't get a hold of me unless something's bad is happening. And that's great to have that kind of trust and openness. Doesn't always happen, and you have to earn it and keep it.
I think we're good. A little shorter. You touched on this briefly. Can you hear me? Okay, you touched on this briefly, but are there any other myths about the position to where you thought you were actually going to be doing X and you found out that it's more about doing Y?
Every single job in the Department of State. I mean, I think all of us in whatever job we encumber now, what's on paper, what we actually do is very different from walking around and dealing with the third floor toilets. And we all have third floor toilets in our job. And also I think it's really post-dependent. What you're doing in small country X in South America is going to be very different from what you're doing to big country Y as a principal officer in Western Europe. So I think also, like any job, it's what you make out of it. And it's so trite and so ridiculous to say. But, as you go into a post, you stay flexible. But also, where do you want to be in 2 years? What do you want to take away? What do you want to add value? And we can all look at our mission strategic plans. We can all look at what value added we're adding to that particular post, to the bureau, to the department, to the government as a whole. But it's also what you bring to the job. So.
I just wanted to say that one of the first things they said in the DCM principal officer course was, okay, we're going to go around the room now and ask you which cone you were. Which cone you were. Because when you're in these positions, you can't just burrow into your Paul nook, your PD nook, whatever your little nook, your niche, your comfort zone was. You have to really, Hamburg, the emphasis was on economic and commercial reporting. So I got really interested really fast in economic and commercial reporting, and I found out I really liked it. So that's the great thing about these jobs, is they can expose you to things maybe you haven't been doing, and you just might find out, wow, I really like that other thing a lot.
I think, a big one is that you always will have things come up that will drive what happens to you there that you cannot predict. And so flexibility is very important. You don't know when something is going to come up that'll completely change your priorities, when there's a disaster, a natural disaster, or a unnatural disaster like a VIP visit. I went to Mongolia and I thought I will never get any VIP visits. And then they joined the Coalition of the Willing and I got Rumsfeld and Bush, and they're like, no.
The one thing that these positions do more than anything else is manage people. And I think was it Camus who said that hell is other people? I think it was Camus. And that is the thing that is the most challenging, I think, of anything, because it's not about resources, it's not about thing, it's about kicking people out of country, dealing with hiring, firing, making sure the right person is there. Oh, there's a gap, someone curtailed. Oh my God, this person's, there's a fight in the concert section. All these kinds of things are the things that really drive your day more so than the substantive stuff, I think.
If you go to that DCM or principal officer's office, you'll see that box of tissues. Yeah. If somebody hasn't cried in your office that day, that's a good day.
Hi, I'm Elise Crane in EURPD. I'm curious, and I appreciate your comment on the cones disappearing when you come into that role, but given the stats and the 7%, the 11%, whatever it was, did any of you feel at any point in the actual jobs that you were seeing differently being PD cone versus Pol or Econ? And if so, how did you deal with it?
No, I don't think so. I didn't feel that. As a matter of fact, as the principal officer in a consulate, so much of our work actually was PD type outreach. So I did an awful lot of PD type outreach speeches, and I'm sort of an introvert by nature, so this taught me just constant exposure to giving speeches. I probably became a better PD officer because of having had that job, I hope. But no, I don't think there was any sort of weird looks at me because I was PD cone.
I'd actually say in the interview process for these jobs is everyone I've spoken to considers it a strength. You're comfortable speaking, you write well, you draft quickly, you can brief quickly. There's no aspect of diplomacy except perhaps trade stats, which I will never deal with, that's unknown to a good public affairs or public diplomacy officer.
I think the what was the question again? No, the cone. That's what the important thing to realize is that at any embassy and in many consulates, most people there are not from the State Department. They have no freaking idea what you're supposed to do. They have no freaking idea how the State Department works. They don't care if it works. They don't think it works. So the differentiation between cones is lost on them. So you're talking about a smaller subset of folks who might begin to wonder, are you a jerk because you're a PD officer, or is it for some other reason? And so it really, I think it quickly disappears, except for the fact that as a PD officer, people will expect you to be really good at the things that most people are really not good at. Like, yeah, go out, talk to these people. You're good at that kind of thing. Yeah, calm the crowd down. The pitchforks, ignore the churches. That's fine. No, go on out there. You'll be great. So that's the thing, I think, the expectation from the state officers, that you're good at all that, outside stuff and managing people and lying through your teeth and blah, blah, blah. That's the thing that I think you have to fight and make people realize that we're all PD officers to a certain extent, and that it isn't up to you to suddenly take the load of the missions, work, outreach work off everybody else.
Danya Eldridge again. I'm at FSI. the other question I had was, could you talk a bit more about the process and the letter and how that works? I know that you had mentioned you were going to talk about that before Nancy's.
I know you've got the good scoop on the letter, Nancy.
Well, no, well, the letter worked for me like twice, so that's all I can say. It worked. My weird letter worked for me. But when we
She'll be
yeah, everyone, please recycle it. No. I think the rules, when I read the instructions for the letter this last time when I was bidding on Principal Officer Alexandria, it all seemed much more vague, and I really didn't understand what I was being asked for. So I just stuck to the thing from 2010 when they were basing it on the basic tenets of the quadrennial defense report thing. And they wanted you to talk about how you achieve things by working through teams, describe an appropriate risk taking, a major challenge that you approached and solved, how you did that, but also, if possible, to describe appropriate risk taking in your career. Talk about how you worked with other agencies to achieve results for the greater mission, and talk a little bit, if you could, about your outreach beyond government, meaning in Afghanistan, how we worked with, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture on cultural heritage preservation, things like that. So that's all I really had.
Yeah, I was applying in the same era when you were going over Hamburg, and the thing that struck me when I read that set of stuff is this is exactly what we do. I was thinking there are a lot of people who would be applying for this who would really have to stretch to find these examples of working outside the government, working with other agencies, being creative, being innovative, using new technology. And I was thinking this is exactly what we do at PD.
Great. Hi, Jill Dietrich in WHA PDA. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more, especially at the earlier mid-levels, about crafting a career where you might be looking at more time in Washington. What types of jobs might be good to do in Washington, details, functional, regional, all of that balance.
Yeah, these guys. You go and then I'll go.
Well, I will say before you start that that's a great question, because our next session is going to be about lobbying and bidding. So please do pay close attention to their answers.
Well, no pressure. No. There is conventional wisdom on this. The more weird your job, the harder it probably is going to be for you to be considered for a sort of standard level DCM or COM job. The State Department culture still is a very kind of hierarchical one where people like to have well-defined jobs. Oh, you were the political counselor in Pakistan. I know what that is. I know what that person does. Oh, you were the oceans and tide expert at the Smithsonian. I don't know what that is and what that is involved in. So I don't know. Maybe the political person would be a better fit. So think about, the role of the selectors in looking at your PAR and saying, does my PAR make sense not to me, but to the person who's making the decision about that? That's not to say that happenstance doesn't matter. It's not to say that there's anything disqualifying about it. But if your career is mostly details, or mostly you're outside of the regionals, or mostly you've done things which are super interesting, but don't necessarily speak to people who are the assistant secretaries saying, oh yeah, I get it. It's more difficult perhaps to be accepted as a candidate for a DCM or a PO or a chief of mission job than someone who has a more, quote, standard resume. Now I'm going to be told how wrong I am from Liz Trudeau.
So I've had a very weird career. I've never had a standard job. Throughout my career, I've taken one job, been moved to another, switched halfway through, done weird details, like advanced White House presidential visits, just things that just don't make any sense at all. But what has been consistent is that I've worked hard to make sure that that information is documented. If it's random letters in your EOPF, which is a terrible mechanism, and I know everyone hates it, that just says, hey, this person did this and this worked out well. That's really useful. I know, Scott and Nancy haven't served in Washington. This was my first tour in Washington. I didn't want to come back to Washington. I think Ben's right, though. Especially now in this day and age, you got to check the box. So the question is, what should you do, and how is it reflected? Do what you like. Do what you want to do because you'll be better at it. And if you end up with a crap job, work your ass off at it. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I think that's it. I never set out never to serve in Washington, but every time I see that bid list, I was like, look at all those cool places overseas. But one thing that they told us, again, at the DCM Principal Officer course, and I've heard this several times, is that they simply will not make a DCM of somebody who's not had a Washington assignment. Principal Officer, as Nancy and I can say, you can skate, but it's very, very rare, very rare. And it makes sense because the DCM, especially a political ambassador, the DCM has to be the one to reach back and do stuff. So keep that in mind. It's a principal officer, you can do it, but if DCM is the goal, you need to get in there and check that box. And it's important. I am not known in Washington. I am known overseas. I'm known in EAP. Nobody knows who I am, including in the EAP front office, even though I spent 30 years in EAP. And it's okay. I've enjoyed my career, but I'm not known, and you need to be known if you want to get all the way up to the top.
All right, just giving everyone a time check. It is 1 p.m. right now for those who need to go back. We are going to wrap up with one more question for the panel, which will be coming from me. Could each of you please give us the best time, your proudest achievement in your principal officer position or DCM position before, and your biggest embarrassment? Yes, you don't get to just tout your own accomplishments.
Well, the thing is that as a PD officer, so many of our proudest achievements are in the midst of tragedy, and so you do a really great job in a very bad situation. There was a time in I was the IO in Peru when the Peruvian Air Force shot down what they thought was a drug aircraft, and it turned out to be a missionary aircraft with a family aboard. The mother and the infant child were killed. The father survived the crash, and it was we had been assisting the aircraft, the Peruvian aircraft, to shoot down in the air bridge denial days, and I was the IO, and this became sort of public relatively quickly, and I was on the phone for, 13 or 14 hours with a bunch of people, and of course the OAS General Assembly was occurring in Canada at the same time, so the entire 7th floor was out of commission, and so I couldn't really get a lot of guidance, and so you had to you make it up on the fly, and it was just it was a hard thing to do, but to be responsive when you didn't have a lot of the facts, and it was a real tragedy and a real problem. Oh, that in DCM job, proudest is probably getting an American hostage rescued from the FARC. When we had a confused individual walked into the forest of Colombia looking for tigers, and was caught by the FARC and chained to a tree, and I think was not meant to be in the jungle, caught by the FARC, and so we spent a good deal of time and effort to. Working with the Red Cross to get this person released, and indeed we did. We succeeded, so that was a proud moment. I think the most embarrassing moments generally they come from when you make a mistake and you realize it post facto and you really can't correct it very well. Something like, if you discipline someone in public in a country team meeting, for example, and you say something especially someone like me who has hoof and mouth disease, and you say something that you shouldn't have said, and you realize that you walk back to your office and go, man, that was just the wrong thing to do, and sort of those kind of, since in a PO or DCM you're in a very public role, in a management role, and when you make you fumble it or you screw up a decision in that way, those are I think some of the most embarrassing moments, because it's not just that you're embarrassed, you're just embarrassed for having, made someone else uncomfortable.
Before I get into mine, I just wanted to say one thing since we're finishing up, and all of you are rising PD stars. Don't forget the senior level PAO ships. And again, from an EAP perspective, I know we have like PAO Beijing that gets one bidder from out of Cone, or PAO Seoul, some of the great PAO jobs of the world. But again, people get to that level and they only want to be DCMs and principal officers. And I loved being a principal officer, but I saw a job in Ankara opening up. I thought, if, there's a place you need a good PD officer, so don't forget to go back and forth and support those senior PD jobs. Proudest moment, I guess, in Shenyang, very difficult post, greater hardship, terrible air, crazy North Koreans, an hour and a half drive away. So when the regional psychiatrist came for a visit at the end of, I think, my second year, and when he debriefed me, they don't tell you any specifics, but they give you a sense of what they're hearing. He said, this post has disturbingly high morale. Like it was some sort of communal psychosis. And he had come up for 3 days from Beijing and did not have a single requested appointment. So I thought, okay, we're doing well to have good morale. Embarrassment, I can think of a lot of difficult times. Embarrassing, I would say one thing for principal officers, you need to put the embarrassment aside. The real, not this kind of regret embarrassment, but you have to be willing to wear the pig hat to promote U.S. pork. You have to, so those kind of embarrassing things. That's tasty.
Don't wear the pig hat.
There's a lot of farmers. And if your political ambassador is from a farming state, you wear the pig hat. Those kind of little embarrassing things, you're the one who always has to open the Easter egg roll, and you're the one who has to do the water balloon toss first before anybody else will do it, and all those kind of things. So just get over yourself and do the embarrassing things and enjoy it.
Yeah, I would say, and I'm going to go back to Ben's, and actually it's a shout out to Jenny from Consular Affairs and some of our colleagues. Excuse me, I'm passing this because clearly that's my phone. Hold on. Sorry. Probably the best work I've done in this department was working with Ginny and our colleagues in PRM and Consular Affairs after the executive orders rolled out. That was astonishing work. And we can talk about it when we're not being video recorded. I think the best work that any of us do in this job or in this department is not work that we do by ourselves. But the work that takes, literally dozens of people and crazy calls and crazy hours. And, when ops is calling at 6:30 a.m., Ginny's looking sad, But, the only response is just build a call. We're going to share information. We're going to figure this out. We're all in it together. By far, the best work that we've ever done is in situations like that. I'd note for the record, I've never worn a pig hat. I will not wear a pig hat, but I am going to Pakistan.
You're going to Pakistan.
So it's fine.
I think you heard all the best stories, and all I can say is, like with Scott, I think the morale thing, if anybody can ever credit you for having something to do with, helping a post to have better morale, that's like huge. I would think that was a huge achievement. And in terms of disappointment in Hamburg, it was me in the German language, giving a speech that I'd practiced 5 times and then delivering it in front of the crowd of 400 and having them laugh at all the wrong places because I said something probably with sexual innuendo in German that I didn't even know about. So that's it.
Wonderful. Can we please give our wonderful panelists a round of applause?